Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Leadership in Politics. With me today is Dr. Maja Zelihic. She is going to share with us the latest research she had on perception. She has a new book coming up, and I am excited to hear her research and what she discovered in that field. Dr. Maja, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dr. Abraham.
Nice to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much again for having me. Dr. Diane Hamilton and I, we're putting finishing touches on our book on perception. And the book is scheduled to come out later on this year. And we were doing a few things, a few promotional things here and there. And I'm very glad that you took the time to invite me to speak to your audience members.
Of course, you're most welcome. So you mentioned Dr. Diane. As you know, she's a friend in common with us. I'm glad you are collaborating on the book with her. Before we go any further, let's introduce the audience. Who is Dr. Maja? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Maja Zelihic. I'm a Fulbright specialist and a NAFSA Global Dialogue partner. Okay. And I'm also a department chair of the Advanced Management Studies with the Forbes School of Business and Technology in San Diego, California.
Okay.
I pride myself in being a global researcher. I'm published in 20 different international publications, and my research specializes in the field of business, and I love doing research in the developing countries. So my research is usually done as a global research ventures.
Wonderful. Nice to hear that. And let me tell you a little bit thing of what I do. I teach organizational behavior on an MBA graduate level. And I tell my students, perception really drives behavior. Tell me, what's happening in the perception world?
Well, a good friend of mine, Diane Hamilton, and we were talking about a potential topic. And as good of a friends as we are, we're quite different. She is such an optimist. And it seems to me that I'm just the opposite. So there were a few situations when we used to work together. Right now, she's a behavioral expert. She's a syndicated radio show host. She's also a Thinkers50, which is an Academy Award equivalent for the business leaders. But there was a segment of time when we actually collaborated and worked together with the Forbes School of Business. And a couple of work situations, Diane always had that positive outlook, and she always had that positive mindset, looking at things from, it's going to be great, it's going to be okay. I, on the other hand, was a little bit of a, oh my goodness, I fear that XYZ may happen, and perhaps, I should have said things differently, I should have done this differently. And we've noticed that as good of a friends as we were, and as good of a colleagues, that we have a complete disconnect when it comes to our perception of things. And that's how
we are different, because individuals are different, and they perceive things differently. Now tell us why people perceive things differently.
Well, there are many things that we discovered as we were doing research for our book, but our experiences, our upbringing, cultural background. I grew up outside of the United States. Diane was born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona. A lot of things that we went through our lifespan triggered us to act differently and react differently to certain situations, and also perceive them differently. I tend to worry much more because I perceive things not to be always as good, as positive as Diane does. So also our gender plays a part, our age, our spirituality. We actually did a whole chapter on spirituality, not just being religious, but also being spiritual, and how that impacts your perception.
It's also a new trend. Spirituality, put it out there, it's a new trend. We're in a secular society. We don't have to bring religion to the discipline. So what we go into spirituality. Because tell us about what is spirituality before we define perception.
Well, we as human beings, we're storytellers. And sometimes we use spiritual things to explain whatever's happening around us. Sometimes we do it in order to process things better, to embrace it, to accept it. You and I had a nice little chat pertaining to our new reality of COVID pandemic.
True.
I am noticing that many of my colleagues that are either more religious or more spiritual are able to process things much better, explain this reality in a manner in which it's more acceptable to them.
Bravo. And why?
So,
why is that?
well, it does appear that we're trying to find meaning in everything as human beings, because yet again, we're storytellers. Because otherwise, if something happens to you and you're consistently on some sort of a negative train of thoughts or events in your life, you're trying to say to yourself, what's the purpose of this? What am I trying to learn from this? You may have a business situation where I was just talking to a colleague earlier today, and I said, you know what? I could have done 10 things differently in that setting. But she asked me straightforward, well, what have you learned?
Good.
So we're actually trying to explain things to ourselves. It is better to sometimes say to yourself, there was a reason why I went through this trial. Otherwise, if there's no reason, you feel pretty bad about yourself.
Yeah. So perception really perception is based on experiences, background, and what probably even hearing things about others will make you perceive certain things about them, not necessarily interacting with them.
You are in a situation where you and I, we were just talking about a terrific event we had last year, and we mentioned a few dear colleagues, and we shared our wonderful experiences pertaining to them. Some of those colleagues I was able to interact with a little bit more, or you were able to interact with a little bit more. Now that we exchange these experiences, next time we see them, we're going to be even more likely to spend some time with them.
So if I mention a specific name based on that experience, your perception is either positive or negative based on that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the same thing we can relate to experience with culture, with people, with faith. And then our behavior is, in return, is affected and impacted by that experience and how we perceive things.
Exactly. Okay.
So what else did you discover? How can perception play a part in making the world a better place, or even the organizational setting? How do you, as a leader in that business, in that field, can find or can put the research you found in your book, or common book, into an organization and improve that organization to the better, and make these people not necessarily spiritual or religious, but grounded enough to know when to use perception to the betterment of self plus the organization?
That is actually our goal. Actually, was exactly to how to form perception that creates global leadership. Because right now, if one is striving to be a leader, that person should strive to be a global leader. We live in a world where we are all interconnected. So what we were looking at the concept of, is there such a thing as a true reality? Because if you and I are in a typical setting, and there is a certain event, it doesn't have to be a drastic event. It can be something that just happened. You and I may interpret that same situation that we're observing differently. Why is that important? In a business setting, we want that perception to be aligned as closely as possible to a reality. The true business reality, as opposed to Maya thinking, oh, so-and-so is out there to get me because they said X, Y, Z, or Abraham is saying, oh, this person is just terrific, whatever they ask me to do. There is somewhere in between my vision of things and your vision in things that is very close to whatever that person's intent is pertaining to the business reality.
Yes.
And how can you increase your motivation, your effectiveness at work, if you align perception to the organizational prosperity and progress? Because ultimately, we want the employees more motivated, because perception can impact motivation quite a bit.
Yes,
and that is what we were looking at. And that's the reason why we also created, and Dr. Diane was actually spearheading that effort, the Perception Index.
Okay, tell me about that one.
Well, the Perception Index is consisted of many questions that we actually are planning to administer to many different organizations. But it actually consists of evaluation, prediction, interpretation, and correlation. Nice. And we were actually doing some testing because as part of our book, the book is very easy to read. It is meant to be very conversational. It is meant to attract general readers. Both Diane and I were very equipped to handle academic articles, but I think, Dr. Abe, you can agree with me, not that many people read academic articles.
That's
so
true.
This is a book that is for the average business reader, general public, but the index is something that we plan to administer within many different organizations.
Nice.
When the employees take that perception index, the leaders within those organizations can assess how aligned their perception is with the perception organization is trying to project. How aligned is that perception is to that concept of, and I'm putting a quotation marks for a reason, true reality, because we can both agree that true reality is still a bit of a fluid concept.
Yes. So you bring awareness really to the organizational setting. To an index like this, when you create a reality in the mind of the person perceiving things, and making them align that awareness with the actual reality, you're creating an enlightened individual within that organization. Because it's not easy for us to say we are different and we stop there. So your index, if I take it here, if it's implemented and administered in such organizations, you bring awareness to the individual to be in line with reality and what it is.
Also, you're becoming aware of your perception. You're becoming aware of what triggers your
have control over your perception.
That is correct. And what is impacting your perception? And think about it in terms. We always talk about it. For example, email is an easy example.
Okay.
If you and I are on the receiving end of our manager's email,
okay,
all of a sudden, I'm okay with the manager's request, and I'm getting started on that particular whatever they assign to me. You, for whatever reason, read something into that email. Your perception of that email is not good. And instead of you working towards completing that task, you're getting yourself really worked up, and maybe you're getting up talking to another colleague. I can't believe you just sent me this. So your perception of that email, my perception of that email, impacted how we're going to work. And that is ultimately what we're trying to help different organizations with. Because the thing is, we will always be different human beings. We don't expect, and the beauty of this world is for us to have different outlook and different opinions and to a certain degree, different perceptions.
Yes.
But think about it, for example, we talked a lot about this pandemic. How can we ignore it? We have to touch upon it. You are having many, many friends that you deal with, family members. Likewise, I have the same way. And we're keeping each other's spirits up, but at some point of time, I have that moment where 2 days ago, I just felt very down.
You feel disconnected, yes.
And the thing is, though, we are all perceiving this crisis differently. You have extreme perceptions. You have some folks that are saying the whole thing as a scenario is a hoax. Then you have folks that are saying, let's not leave the house at all, and let's even wear a mask if no one's around us, that kind of a scenario. So in between all that, you have that scientific perception, you have what's really happening on the ground level, but all of us are processing, we all have access to the information, and we're processing them, quite a bit different. So in terms of valuation, when we talk about the EPIC, it's about self-awareness, empathy, emotional intelligence-based issues. How well do I know myself and how others may perceive me? And for example, men, as a scenario, some of our sample population that we administered index within, men were more likely to say that they are generally speaking happy when interacting with others in comparison to women. They were also more likely to need the immediate gratification for the work well done. And women were more likely, believe it or not, to control their emotions when angry at a workplace.
Okay.
And we
what
have
was the reason? What was the reason for that?
The thing is, I know there's
like weak or anything. What's the reason?
They can control themselves better. That doesn't mean that their range of emotions is not higher. But within a work setting, they were able to suppress that anger a little bit better.
Interesting.
But we can argue back and forth whether we do the same job at home. I think it's just the opposite at home.
Oh, that's very interesting what you just said.
But this is a preliminary. So keep in mind, our goal is to administer this within many, many different companies. So this is just a very small sample. But, the biggest difference was, for example, men were more likely than women to say that they did not allow stress to impact how they interact with other people. And I'm going to be quite honest with you. I was just reflecting on my own behavior. If I'm stressed, that does impact how I interact. Now, that's not generalizing because I'm just one sample, but keep that in mind. But I think that when we talk about...
Actually, it does in every environment with every gender, whether it's male or female. It's a stress.
It's a stress. But men tend to handle it a little bit better when they interact.
Why? Why is that?
That is, there's a lot of whys that we have to discover through more samples. Now, one thing that I am speculating is that men try to project that they're more in control, and
power,
more power, and showing stress or showing emotions may take away from that perception of power.
Do you think female is the same point where she controls her emotions during a work setting to show control, that she knows what she's doing, so she doesn't look weak in an environment of male environment?
We are suppressing a lot of things in order not to play within the prejudice. So if we know for a fact that some women leaders, just a bias that they may be accused of being too emotional, we may suppress our emotions even in a setting where maybe our emotions would be welcomed.
Beautiful.
And then we create another perception of being cold.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a balancing
act. So the balance, now the key is what you're discovering, find the balance in between this uncontrolled settings.
You go from, my perception of my childhood is so perfect. Sometimes I wonder, was it really that good, or was it good in comparison to what happened thereafter? So your perception can change even when you reflect on some prior events.
Oh yeah, exactly. Even as the more facts you have, the open communication you have with others, in interaction with them, your perception will change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perception will change. The way we perceive things does affect us. Does affect the way we even interact with others.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the index. When is the book gonna be coming? When is it? Is it who's the publisher?
We were actually thinking of it being published this year, and we're still hoping that it's going to be published towards the end of this year.
Okay.
However, don't quote us on this for sure. The reason being is a big part of the promotion of the book, the way we were envisioning it, that we were going to do a lot of global lectures and global promotion. And in order for that to function, we would actually need to be able to get out. And right now we're not in a situation to do so. Can you give us a little bit of an insight pertaining to that?
So I am very optimist. I suspended my judgment about probably 10 years ago.
What happened? What happened in your life when you decided to?
You become more enlightened. You see things. You talked about your upbringing. You talked about how things were rosy and beautiful. 17 and a half, everything stopped, right? And you don't see what you saw before due to whatever reasons. And sorry that I know the facts. I know the realities, what happened in that part of the world. So I know what could do, but you never let it stop you. You moved ahead and you become the established and achieved person that you are. The reason I suspended my judgment is because I became individually more enlightened. Enlightened through seeing things in the eyes of others. Empathy, compassion. I didn't think of myself anymore as I have to be or become. I saw it through how others could improve through inspiration I can provide to them. In my classes, I have all races, all colors. I treat them all equally. My friends, all races, all colors, all religions, I treat them all equally. What matters to me is the individual and what they contribute to society and to another human being. You do that, and you're good in my book. I don't care for your race. I don't care for your faith and your religion. And I teach culture. I know how cultures are formed. And I tell my students, I share that with our audience through you. I tell everybody, a culture is made by us as human beings. We make it, whether it's a faith-based or a secular-based. We made it. It gave us some stability through a status quo. We adopted it in its state for years to come. Some stayed 100 years, 300 years. Some, they perish with time.
What I heard when you were speaking, which struck me as interesting, is you were correlating the concept of perception and the concept of judgment quite a bit. So the judgment itself
Is the behavior.
Yeah, so you're trying to get rid of that aspect, to be an open-minded, and perception and being open-minded is very much correlated, because what one of the segments of our book deals with a culture and people that travel quite a bit, and as we travel, every single time we travel, we're changing our perception. I think that one of the biggest education is number one for the perception to change if it's in need of changing. But number two would definitely be being able to travel, experience other cultures, interact with others, as you mentioned, because if we don't interact with others, yes, you can learn a lot from the videos, from the books, reading. But you do have to, we were just exchanging some travel experiences. You have to actually go somewhere, sit with people, eat the food, interact, laugh, through humor in particular, we can change perception of others. And there were many places, I'm doing a lot of global research, and I did a lot of global research in the developing world in particular. Mm-hmm. And there were some places that one thing that I pride myself when it comes to research is I would always go with an open mind and being able to adapt and adjust. I always like to say, luxury is wonderful if available. If it's not available, let's just do exactly what's available, and let's have a beautiful experience no matter where. Because some of the most beautiful.
And you're telling me you're not positive? You are so positive.
Well, and it's funny because you can have different layers of perception depending upon different circumstances.
You know what just happened? That 17 years and a half came out of you. Yes. You started seeing things and what you really know, who you really are. Positive individual. And life circumstances and life experiences change us, make us different people. And by the way, every culture, funny part, every culture thinks they are the best.
Yes.
They think they are better.
Yes.
Silly.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that's why you have to be, seriously, I would recommend this to all young people. I tell my kids that all the time. One has to be well-traveled because one has to be humble. If you're humble, you're able to learn, because if you come from a position of, we're the best no matter what, you're never going to learn. Yeah. But as far as your perception, it should change through life. It should improve. The same thing you mentioned, that you're an expert in emotional intelligence. We are actively working on our emotional intelligence.
We're students. We're all students of emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. But there is a correlation between perception and emotional intelligence. And a lot of times when perception is really steering away from the reality, at that point of time, that emotional intelligence index is not where it needs to be. Yeah. And that's when we tend to overreact. And, so I think we build walls around ourselves, around our minds, as a protective mechanisms. I've never met anyone who experienced any sort of trauma that said, you know what, I have this safeguard mechanism just because I'm that kind of a person. No, they're trying to shield themselves of whatever experience was. Which is okay. It's okay to be aware. It's okay to awareness is a must. It's okay to be warned in a way that you are not. You can't trust everybody, although we advocate to trust others. We advocate for that, and I believe you do too. But in the same time, you really have to be aware that not everybody can be trusted. Yes. So to put a shield, put a wall, it's okay, but do not put it a high wall. Do not put it a high wall that you can't even see yourself anymore and see others, and you can't even relate anymore. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So who are your audience or targeted audience for the book? Who are you targeting this book for? Schools?
It's a very broad audience. We wrote it in a manner while the index itself, we're hoping to, Perception Power Index, we hope to administer that index within many, many different companies, because it's a very unique index. Exactly. But we are actually hoping for the book to be targeting broad audience. Absolutely can be business leaders, can be business professionals, but also folks that are not in they're not in the business setting at all, because we have a lot of information that is very important and that is very applicable to any venue of life. As much as we in our day jobs, we like to do academic articles, as I mentioned. The book is written in a manner that is very conversational.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually giving a lot of stories, a lot of examples. You saw a video that I recently put together online that is actually sharing a few of those stories that are quite interesting. For example, I want to share with your audience as well. We were touching upon Plato and allegory of the cave, where as the story goes, the prisoners were chained to the walls of the cave, and all they saw their entire life were the shadows, because the puppeteers were behind them projecting certain objects.
Yes.
So for them, the reality were those shadows. And if you were to unchain one of them, as the story further continues, they are not accepting the reality, which we know to be a reality.
Yes.
One of the things that we focused on as well is different things that we experienced through traveling and different settings that we were in, where perception impacted how one does business. Perception impacts how one acts towards family members at times. I mean, even in relationships. In relationships, a lot of times we have an argument over something that is actually just a different way of perceiving the same situation. So we can help each other in many different settings, but the book is focusing on the leadership, and the book is focusing on how to build global leaders if we're aligning the perception properly. One thing is, we are not trying to suppress differences in perception, because that's what makes us beautiful. Yet again, we're just trying to make sure that in a business reality, we're not having this complete far-fetched, someone is seeing something that is not there, because that can cause problems for the business leaders ultimately. And how can we communicate in order to make sure that we are projecting what we want others to perceive? How many times we hear about this leader that is under the assumption everyone is impressed with his or her skills, and then the perception of others pertaining to his or her leadership is completely negative.
It's very true. So really, your index is a guide for leaders how to perceive things and be aware of how perception played part in the behavior plus the decision making.
Yes.
Especially these people in a position of power that will make decisions, and if the information they have, faulty information, their decision will be not accurate, not sound. Very good, very powerful.
It will make you a better leader, and also within the organizations, you can have more effective employees, better motivated employees. On a personal level, we really had fun investigating a lot of things, because we are also, you have to also be aware of your own perception. You have to be aware of some of your shortcomings. The same thing with emotional intelligence, because if I'm not aware of, like I said, the idea happened just between the two of us speaking to each other, and kind of, wow, we perceive this completely differently. And it was funny to us how
it's the same environment, same probably tools and equipment, different settings, but you perceive it differently.
Yes.
Because perception will lead you, especially if you're aware of it, will lead you to make wise choices, correct decisions, and good behavior is molded after the perception based on facts. Your book is going to change a lot of lives. I'm so proud of what you've done. I'm so proud of what you've done. I know the power of perception. I know how important it is in shaping behaviors, and hopefully it's going to add to the science of leadership and to leaders out there, so they would learn. And I hope your index will make a difference. So you have two indexes now. You have the perception index, and you have the curiosity index.
Yes. And
thank you for leading the way. Thank you for leading the way.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
You haven't done yet. Anything you want to add? Anything else you want to share with us?
At this point in time, I'm really thankful that I had a chance to actually introduce our upcoming book. The title of the book is The Power of Perception, Eliminating Boundaries to Create Successful Global Leaders. I will circle back with you once the book is fully published with all the details, and I really appreciate you. And hopefully next year we're going to see each other in person in California.
I hope so. That's about time. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing this beautiful insights and good news. Congratulations ahead of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. You be safe.
You too.